Let me tell you how my entire civilization voted itself into extinction in under 6 minutes. I am recording this from a ship that is not mine, in a language that is not my own. And I am alive only because a species I once called primitive decided I was worth saving. My name is Counselor Rithon. I was the senior strategic advisor to the Valurian Dominion High Command. And if you are hearing this, then the broadcast has reached you, which means there is still time for you to learn from what we did wrong. The Valurian Dominion ruled 47 star systems. We had existed for 4,000 years. We had conquered 11 species and absorbed their worlds into our territory without ever losing a single campaign. Our crystalline warships were the finest in the galaxy, our weapons the most precise, our soldiers the most disciplined. We believed we were the apex of evolution. We believed that the universe had made us to rule it. We were wrong. It started with a probe, a deep-range survey drone designated KR-7741, sent out 2 years earlier to catalog uncharted systems in the western spiral arm of the galaxy. It returned with data on 31 worlds, most of them barren rock or gas giants, with no strategic value. But one of them caught the attention of the Expansion Council, a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, the third world in its system. The probe had designated it Target 7741C, but its inhabitants called it Earth. The initial data was unremarkable. Class 7 civilization, no faster-than-light travel, no energy shielding technology, no unified planetary government. The dominant species, bipedal carbon-based mammals, had only recently begun sending primitive craft beyond their own atmosphere. They rated a 2.1 on the Galactic Threat Index, which placed them somewhere between a developing insect colony and a moderately organized fungal network. For reference, the Valurian Dominion rated itself a 9.4. Supreme Commander Vorath reviewed the data in a session that lasted less than 10 minutes. He saw a weak, fractured world ripe for subjugation. He saw new resources, new territory, and an easy addition to his legacy. He turned to the Expansion Council and said the words that would end us. He said, "Schedule the conquest." I was the only one who objected, not because I am brave or wise, but because I am thorough. I had read the full probe data, all 900 pages of it, and the deeper I read, the more uneasy I became. The inhabitants of Earth, the humans, had over 14,000 active nuclear warheads deployed across their planet. These were not pointed at some external enemy. They were pointed at each other. Their nations had spent decades building weapons capable of rendering their own world uninhabitable, and they kept them on alert at all times, ready to fire within minutes. I had never encountered a species that invested so heavily in the tools of its own destruction, while simultaneously fighting to survive. But that was only the beginning. The humans had mapped their own genetic code and begun rewriting it. They had built machines that could think, not true artificial intelligence like ours, but primitive neural networks that were learning at an accelerating rate. They had developed biological agents in laboratories that could wipe out entire populations. They had split the atom and harnessed its power before they had even left their own planet. They knew they were poisoning their atmosphere, and they kept doing it anyway. Their entertainment consisted of simulated warfare, stories about the end of their own world, and competitions where they deliberately injured each other for sport. I compiled these observations into a formal threat assessment brief. My conclusion was clear. This species is not weak. It is simply young, and it is already at war with itself. A civilization that survives its own capacity for self-destruction is not one that will submit quietly to external subjugation. I presented the brief to Supreme Commander Vorath personally. He read the first page, set it down, and looked at me the way one looks at a child who has said something embarrassing. "Counselor Rithon," he said, "they have no shields. They have no fleet. They cannot even achieve faster-than-light travel. They are animals with nuclear toys. We have conquered species 100 times more advanced than this." "With respect, Commander," I replied, "we have never conquered a species that was this aggressive at this early a stage of development. Every other civilization we subjugated had outgrown internal conflict before reaching nuclear capability. The humans reached nuclear capability and then kept building more. They did not use these weapons as deterrents. They used them as identity. Each of their nations defined itself by the size of its arsenal. Vorath waved his hand dismissively. All the more reason to strike now, before they mature. If they are this dangerous in their infancy, imagine what they could become if left unchecked. I wanted to say that was exactly my point. I wanted to say that a species this dangerous in its infancy should not be provoked. I wanted to say that the smartest strategy was to leave this world alone and monitor it from a distance until we understood what we were dealing with. But the council had already made up its mind. The vote was called. 41 members voted in favor of immediate subjugation. I was the only dissenting voice. The conquest of Earth was approved in 5 minutes and 43 seconds, the fastest approval in Dominion history. They were so eager they did not even finish their afternoon meal before signing the order. 200 warships were assembled within a week, the finest fleet the Dominion had ever dispatched for a single target. Vorath wanted it to be overwhelming. He wanted it to be a statement. He said the humans should look up at their sky and see nothing but Valyrian steel, and that the sight alone would break them. I stood on the observation deck of the command ship as we entered faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched into long white lines and then vanished entirely as we slipped between the folds of normal space. Around me, officers celebrated. They toasted to easy victory. They laughed about how quickly the humans would surrender. I did not celebrate. I stood at the viewport and thought about a species that had built 14,000 weapons capable of destroying its own world, and then woke up every morning and sent its children to school as if that were normal. I thought about a species that entertained itself with stories about its own extinction and then went to work the next day. I thought about what that kind of mind would do when the threat was no longer hypothetical, when the enemy was no longer its own reflection, but something real, something alien, something from the stars. I thought about all of this, and I was afraid. The journey took 11 days. During that time, I submitted 3 additional briefs to the command staff. Each one was more detailed than the last. Each one was ignored. On the 8th day, Vorath summoned me and told me that my continued pessimism was bordering on insubordination. He suggested I either find enthusiasm for the mission or confine myself to quarters until it was over. I chose neither. I continued my work. I studied the probe data until I had memorized every detail. I learned the names of their continents, their oceans, their largest cities. I studied their languages, their histories, their wars. And the more I learned, the more certain I became that we were making the worst mistake in the history of the Dominion. Humans had fought each other continuously for as long as their recorded history existed. They had never known a generation without conflict. They had refined the art of warfare to an extent no other known species had matched. They had developed tactics, strategies, doctrines, entire philosophies dedicated to the organized application of force. They studied their own battles the way our scientists studied star formation, with meticulous attention to detail and an endless hunger for improvement. And there was something else, something I could not quantify, but could not ignore. In every war they had fought, in every conflict that had threatened their survival, the humans had displayed a quality that I had never observed in any other species. When pressed to the edge of destruction, they did not break. They did not scatter. They did not surrender. They came together, their internal divisions, their rivalries, their ancient hatreds, all of it evaporated the moment an external threat appeared. They stopped fighting each other and started fighting as one. I tried one last time to explain this to Vorath, on the morning we were scheduled to arrive in the Sol system. I went to his quarters before dawn and laid out my case with every piece of evidence I had gathered. "Commander," I said, "the humans have a concept they call total war. It means the complete mobilization of an entire civilization for the purpose of conflict. Every citizen becomes a soldier. Every factory becomes an armory. Every resource is redirected toward a single goal. They have done this before, multiple times, and every time, the side that triggered it lost." Vorath looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Then we will simply have to be the exception, counselor." He dismissed me. I walked back to the observation deck and watched as the stars reappeared. We had arrived. The yellow sun of the Sol system burned ahead of us, small and ordinary, and somewhere in its warm glow, on the third rock from that unremarkable star, 7 billion humans were about to discover they were not alone in the universe. We sent 200 warships to conquer a species that had already survived itself. I should have resigned. I should have refused. I should have done anything other than what I did, which was stand on that observation deck and watch as the fleet arranged itself into attack formation around a world that had no idea what was coming. But I did not resign. I watched. And what happened next is why I am recording this message. Not as a confession, not as an apology, as a warning. Because what happened next changed everything. Not just for us, not just for the humans, for every species in this galaxy that has ever looked at a weaker world and thought it would be easy. It was not easy. It was the end of us. The first sign that something was wrong came 30 seconds after we dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the largest planet in their system, the massive gas giant they called Jupiter. Our arrival should have been undetectable. Valurian stealth protocols were the most advanced in the galaxy. We had entered the systems of 11 different civilizations without being noticed, and those species had technology far beyond what the humans possessed. But 30 seconds after we arrived, a transmission reached us. Not a broad sweep, not an accidental detection, a targeted, focused signal aimed directly at our fleet formation. It came from the third planet, from Earth, and it said, in crude but functional galactic common, "We see you." I was standing beside the communications officer when the message came through. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on a Valurian soldier before. It was confusion, but underneath the confusion, something else, something close to doubt. "How?" he whispered. "How do they know we are here? They do not have the technology." I did not have an answer. Not then. I learned later that the humans had detected the gravitational disturbance of our fleet's arrival, using a network of deep space observatories, originally built to study black holes and gravitational waves. They had not been looking for us specifically. They had simply built instruments sensitive enough to notice when 200 massive objects suddenly appeared near Jupiter, and from that single data point, they had calculated our position, our approximate numbers, and our likely trajectory toward Earth in less than 20 seconds. 20 seconds. Our intelligence division would have taken hours. Supreme Commander Vorath was not concerned. He ordered the standard Dominion protocol. A subjugation ultimatum was broadcast to the planet on all frequencies. The message was simple, as it always was. Surrender your world. Disarm all military forces. Submit to genetic cataloging and population restructuring. Become a vassal state of the Valurian Dominion. Resistance will result in annihilation. We expected what we always received: panic, fragmented responses from individual leaders, desperate attempts at negotiation, pleas for mercy. Perhaps a few defiant transmissions from military factions, quickly silenced by their own governments. What we received instead arrived 4 minutes after our ultimatum was sent. It was a single, unified response, not from one nation, not from one government, from all of them. Every sovereign state on the planet had apparently stopped every disagreement, every dispute, every political rivalry the instant our signal was detected. In 4 minutes, a species that had never agreed on anything in its entire history agreed on this. The message was brief. It read, "We acknowledge your declaration of hostility. You have 72 hours to withdraw from our solar system. There will be no second warning." I read it 3 times. Then I turned to Vorath, and for the first time in my career, I raised my voice in the command center. "Commander, do you understand what just happened? A species with over 200 independent nations just issued a unified counter-ultimatum in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That is not the response of a disorganized, primitive world. That is the response of a species that has been waiting for this." Vorath silenced me with a look. "They are posturing, counselor. It is a reflex. Prey animals bare their teeth before they run." He ordered the fleet to advance to orbital position and begin targeting protocols for a demonstration bombardment. 3 cities would be struck. Enough destruction to prove we were serious. Enough death to break their will. It was standard procedure. It had worked on every world before. The fleet moved into position around Earth, and during the 72 hours the humans had demanded, I did something none of my colleagues thought to do. I listened to their communications. The humans had not encrypted their transmissions. At first, I assumed this was an oversight, a sign of technological limitation. It took me 2 days to realize they had left their channels open on purpose. They wanted us to hear. They wanted us to see what was coming. What I heard in those 72 hours remade my understanding of this species entirely. There was no panic, no evacuation orders, no religious ceremonies or farewell rituals. Instead, every military installation on the planet had gone to full readiness within 90 minutes of our arrival. Factories that had been producing consumer goods that morning were retooling for military output by nightfall. Governments that had been locked in diplomatic disputes for decades were sharing intelligence, pooling resources, and coordinating defensive strategies as if they had been allies their entire existence. And the civilians, this was what disturbed me most. The civilians were not fleeing, they were volunteering, millions of them. Within 48 hours, over 60 million humans had registered for military service. Not conscription, not forced enrollment. They chose this. Farmers, teachers, engineers, artists, elderly people, young people barely old enough to qualify. They lined up at recruitment centers in such numbers that the centers ran out of forms to process them. I intercepted a communication between a human military commander, a woman named Helen Price, and her counterpart in another nation. Helen was coordinating the distribution of nuclear assets, and she spoke with such calm precision that I initially mistook her for an artificial intelligence. She was discussing the destruction of cities and the potential loss of millions of lives with the same measured tone our logistics officers used to discuss supply shipments. Then, at the end of the transmission, she said something that I have never forgotten. She said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Every last one of us." I reported my findings to Vorath. He was not interested. The 72 hours passed. The humans did not surrender. No one on the command staff was surprised. No one on the command staff was prepared for what came next. Vorath gave the order at dawn on the 4th day. 3 cities were targeted. The bombardment was surgical and devastating. 3 beams of concentrated energy, each one powerful enough to level a mountain, struck the surface of Earth in quick succession. 3 cities burned. The energy readings from the surface showed massive destruction. Estimated casualties were in the hundreds of thousands. Standard procedure dictated that we wait 12 hours after a demonstration strike. In that window, every species we had ever conquered had surrendered. Most surrendered within the first hour. The humans did not surrender in the first hour. They did not surrender in the second hour. They did not surrender at all. What they did, exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes after we struck their cities, was launch 9,214 projectiles from the surface of their planet directly at our fleet. I was on the observation deck when the alert sounded. The tactical display lit up like a swarm of insects rising from a hive, thousands of bright points climbing from the surface, accelerating through the atmosphere, arcing toward our orbital positions. They were not energy weapons. They were not guided plasma beams. They were rockets, chemical propulsion rockets with nuclear warheads mounted on their tips. These were the same weapons they had been pointing at each other yesterday. Every single one of them was now pointing at us. Our shields absorbed the majority of the impacts. Valurian energy barriers were designed to withstand concentrated plasma fire from capital ships. Nuclear detonations were crude by comparison. But the humans had not sent 1 warhead or 10 warheads. They had sent over 9,000. And our shields, formidable as they were, had never been tested against that volume of simultaneous impacts. 11 ships reported shield failures. Their barriers collapsed under the sheer weight of repeated nuclear detonations, each one hammering the same frequency, until the generators overloaded. 2 destroyers were caught in overlapping blast zones and broke apart. I watched from the viewport as the debris of Valurian warships, ships that had survived a dozen campaigns, tumbled through the void trailing fire and atmosphere. The command center erupted into chaos. Officers shouted damage reports. Vorath stood at the center of it all, his crystalline face rigid, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing to say. I approached him quietly. "Commander," I said, "those weapons were aimed at each other 4 days ago. In 4 days, they redirected their entire nuclear arsenal at an enemy in orbit. Every warhead, every missile, every delivery system. They did not hesitate. They did not negotiate among themselves about who would contribute what. They simply pointed everything they had at us and fired. Vorath turned to me. "What is your point, Counselor?" "My point, Commander, is that we did not frighten them. We did not break their will. We gave them something they have never had before. We gave them a reason to stop fighting each other. We gave 7 billion of the most aggressive organisms in this galaxy a common enemy, and they are grateful for it." Vorath stared at me. Then he turned back to the tactical display and ordered a full planetary bombardment. No more demonstrations. No more waiting. Total surface destruction. As the order went out and the fleet powered its weapons to maximum, I stood at the viewport and watched Earth turn slowly below us. Somewhere on that burning surface, 9,000 missiles had just been launched by a species that had known about us for 4 days. They had no shields. They had no fleet. They had no faster-than-light capability, and they had just destroyed 2 Valurian warships and damaged 11 others using weapons they had built to fight themselves. We burned 3 of their cities, and they answered with 9,000 suns, and in that moment, I understood something that Vorath never would. We had not shown them consequences. We had shown them a reason to unite, and a united humanity was something the galaxy had never seen before. Something the galaxy was not ready for. Something we were certainly not ready for. By the 6th day, I stopped thinking of them as primitives. By the 10th day, I stopped thinking of them as inferior. By the 14th day, I stopped thinking of them as human. I started thinking of them as what they truly were, the enemy we could not outrun. Vorath's full planetary bombardment had been executed with precision. Our fleet poured energy into the surface of Earth for 16 consecutive hours. We targeted military installations, industrial centers, transportation networks, communication hubs. The destruction was immense. Satellite imagery showed entire regions scorched to bare rock. Forests burned for days. Oceans boiled near the coastlines where our beams struck. By every metric we used to measure the collapse of a civilization, Earth should have been finished. It was not finished. The first reports came from ground penetration scans on the 7th day. Our sensors showed massive underground activity. Heat signatures, electromagnetic output, movement. Millions of individual life signs clustered in networks beneath the surface that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The humans had gone underground. Not in a desperate, panicked scramble. In an organized, pre-planned evacuation that had begun the moment our ultimatum was received. While their diplomats were issuing counter-ultimatums, and their militaries were redirecting nuclear arsenals, their civilian population had been moving into bunkers, subway systems, mine shafts, cave networks, and underground facilities that many of their own governments had built decades ago in preparation for exactly this kind of catastrophe. They had been preparing for extinction-level events their entire modern history, not because they expected aliens, because they expected each other. The irony of it was suffocating. The same paranoia that had driven them to build shelters against their own weapons was now saving them from ours. Vorath ordered subsurface bombardment. Our weapons could penetrate rock, but not efficiently. The humans had positioned themselves beneath layers of granite, limestone, and reinforced steel that absorbed and diffused our energy beams. For every bunker we collapsed, 10 remained intact, and the humans kept moving, kept reorganizing, kept communicating through hardened fiber optic lines buried deep beneath the surface that our bombardment could not reach. On the 9th day, something happened that no one in the Valyrian military had anticipated. Our salvage teams had been dispatched to recover debris from the 2 destroyers lost in the initial nuclear barrage. When they arrived at the debris field, the wreckage was gone. Not destroyed, not scattered, gone. The humans had collected it. Using what, I could not imagine. They had no ships capable of orbital operations on that scale, but they had done it anyway. Later analysis suggested they had used modified heavy-lift rockets, the same ones they used to launch their crewed satellites, fitted with magnetic grappling systems improvised from industrial mining equipment. They had launched dozens of these vehicles into the debris field, grabbed everything they could, and brought it back to the surface before we even noticed. By the 12th day, the consequences of that salvage operation became terrifyingly clear. I was reviewing sensor data in my quarters when a junior analyst named Sareth burst through my door without permission. His face was pale, his crystalline skin flickering with the patterns that indicated extreme agitation in our species. "Counselor," he said, "you need to see this." He led me to the intelligence center, where a team of analysts was gathered around a display showing intercepted human communications. The transmissions were coming from a facility deep beneath a mountain range on the largest continent. The humans called it a place named something I could not easily pronounce, but our translators rendered it as Cheyenne Mountain. Inside that mountain, human scientists and engineers were doing something that should have been impossible. They were taking apart the salvaged Valurian technology piece by piece. They were studying our shield generators, our energy conduits, our navigation arrays, and they were not just studying them, they were building copies. Crude copies, imperfect copies, copies held together with welding seams and adhesive compounds and materials that were never designed for the purpose they were being forced to serve, but copies that worked. In 12 days, a species that had never encountered alien technology had reverse-engineered our shield harmonics. In 12 days. Our own engineering corps had taken 3 centuries to develop that technology. The humans had done it in less than 2 weeks. I ran the numbers. I built a projection model based on their current rate of technological acquisition. The results made me physically ill. At their current pace of learning, humans would achieve functional parity with Valurian weapons technology within 3 months. Within 6 months, they would surpass it. I presented these findings to Vorath in an emergency briefing. He stood behind his command table, surrounded by his senior officers, and he listened to every word I said. When I finished, I expected anger. I expected dismissal. What I got was worse. I got silence. Then Admiral Korath, the commander of our tactical division, spoke. "That is not possible," he said flatly. "No species adapts that quickly. Your models are flawed." "My models are based on observed data," I replied. "In 6 days, they learned to counteract our shield frequencies. In 9 days, they salvaged our technology. In 12 days, they replicated it. These are not projections, Admiral. These are facts. And the trajectory is accelerating." The room was silent. Then Vorath spoke. "Even if what you say is true, Counselor, they are still confined to their planet. They have no fleet. They cannot reach us." "Not yet," I said. "But at this rate, how long before they can?" No one answered. The answer came on the 16th day. Our long-range sensors detected a launch from Earth's surface. Not a missile, not a nuclear weapon, a vessel. A single, ungainly craft that looked like it had been assembled from the wreckage of 3 different technologies. Parts of it were human, parts of it were Valurian. Parts of it appeared to be held together with nothing more than determination and structural cable. It rose from the atmosphere on a pillar of chemical flame. Then something extraordinary happened. The Valurian-derived components activated. A crude, unstable, but unmistakable faster-than-light field enveloped the craft. It flickered. It sputtered. It looked as though it might tear itself apart at any moment. Then it jumped. It vanished from our sensors entirely and reappeared 40,000 kilometers away in the space of a heartbeat. Then it jumped again. And again. Each jump was erratic, imprecise, and almost certainly dangerous for anyone aboard. But each jump was also faster and more controlled than the last. The humans had achieved faster-than-light travel. In 16 days. The vessel did not attack us. It jumped around our fleet in a series of rapid, unpredictable movements, almost as if it were testing itself, learning its own capabilities. Then it jumped back toward Earth and disappeared into the atmosphere. That night, I received a communication request from a source I did not recognize. It was coming from the surface, from the humans. Someone down there had figured out how to use our own communication frequencies and was transmitting directly to my personal channel. I answered it. A face appeared on my screen. A human face, female, middle-aged, lines around her eyes that suggested years of intense concentration. She was wearing a uniform I did not recognize, covered in soot and burn marks. Behind her, I could see other humans working frantically on equipment that was half human and half Valurian. "You are Counselor Rithan," she said. It was not a question. I am, I replied. How do you know my name? We recovered your personnel database from the wreckage of one of your destroyers. I have read your threat assessment brief, the one your commander ignored. I said nothing. My name is Helen Price, she continued. I am the Senior Military Coordinator for the United Earth Defense Initiative. I am contacting you because I believe you are the only rational mind in your fleet. What do you want? I asked. I want you to understand something, Counselor. We are not going to surrender. We are not going to negotiate. We are not going to stop. Your commander made his choice when he burned our cities. Now we are making ours. And what choice is that? She leaned closer to the screen. Her eyes were steady. There was no fear in them. There was something else entirely, something I had seen in the eyes of Valyrian soldiers before their most dangerous missions. Absolute commitment. We are coming up, she said, and when we get there, your fleet will wish it had listened to you. The transmission ended. On the 18th day, the humans launched their first combat vessels. 4 ships, each one a hybrid monstrosity of human engineering and salvaged Valyrian technology. They emerged from the atmosphere in a staggered formation and immediately engaged our outer patrol screen. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Our patrol ships were superior in every technical measure. Better weapons, better shields, better sensors, better training. But the humans fought with a ferocity that defied tactical analysis. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not break formation when outnumbered. When one of their ships lost its weapons capability, the pilot, a man later identified as Captain Simon Price, aimed his crippled vessel directly at a Valyrian frigate and accelerated to maximum speed. The collision destroyed both ships. The other 3 human vessels continued fighting as if nothing had happened. They destroyed 2 more of our patrol ships before withdrawing back to Earth's atmosphere. I reviewed the combat logs that evening. The human pilots had been in contact with each other throughout the engagement. I had their communications translated. There was no panic in their voices, no desperation. They spoke to each other with calm professionalism, calling out targets, coordinating maneuvers, adjusting tactics in real time. And underneath all of that, there was something else. They were encouraging each other. When Simon Price made his final run at the frigate, the last thing he said was, "Tell my wife I will see her in the morning light." The other pilots acknowledged his words, and then they kept fighting. On the 23rd day, the humans launched their second wave. 8 ships this time, better designed, more stable. The FTL systems no longer flickered. The weapons were more accurate. They had learned from the first engagement and adapted everything that had failed. This time, they did not just fight, they boarded us. A Valyrian cruiser on the outer perimeter, the Sovereign Light, reported a hull breach on its lower decks. Security teams were dispatched. What they found were humans, 6 of them, in improvised spacesuits made from industrial hazard gear, reinforced with Valyrian hull plating. They carried ballistic weapons, projectile launchers that fired metal slugs at high velocity, and cutting torches designed for shipyard work. They fought through 3 decks before our security teams contained them. 4 of the 6 were stopped. 2 reached the engine room. They did not attempt to capture the ship. They planted explosive charges on the main power conduit and detonated them remotely. The Sovereign Light lost all power. Its shields collapsed. Its weapons went dark. It drifted, lifeless, and the human ships that had been waiting outside towed it away with magnetic grapples. The humans had captured a Valyrian warship, a fully intact, operational Valyrian warship. That evening, I intercepted a human broadcast that was being transmitted on an open channel, clearly intended for us to hear. It was a short message from Helen Price. She said, "Thank you for the ship. We will take good care of it." I stood in my quarters and listened to that message 3 times. Then I sat down and wrote in my personal log the words that I still believe to be the most important I have ever written. We have fought 11 species. All of them feared what they might lose. These creatures do not fear loss. They grieve it, they mourn it, and then they use it as fuel. They are not fighting to survive. They are fighting because fighting is what they do when someone threatens the things they love, and a species that fights for love rather than survival is a species without limits. An 81-year-old human woman named Margaret Holloway had piloted one of the boarding craft. She was a retired engineer who had spent her career building bridges. She had volunteered for the mission, knowing she would not return. Her last transmission, sent to her family before the boarding action began, was a recording of her singing a lullaby she had once sung to her grandchildren. Margaret Holloway breached the hull of a Valyrian warship, armed with a cutting torch and a bag of explosives. She was 81 years old. I added her name to my file. I had started keeping a file of individual humans whose actions I found significant. By the 23rd day, the file was over 200 pages long. By the 30th day, I stopped keeping the file. There were too many names. There is a moment in every predator's life when it realizes it is no longer the predator. For the Valyrian Dominion, that moment arrived on day 31, when the humans came to us. Not to Earth's orbit, not to the space around their own planet, to us. To Valyrian space. They crossed the boundary of their own star system and struck at the supply lines that fed our fleet. 12 vessels made the jump. 12 ugly, mismatched, barely held together ships, crewed by people who had learned faster-than-light travel less than 2 weeks ago. They appeared without warning at the Valyrian supply depot near the Koroth Nebula, 4 light-years from Earth. And they hit us with everything they had. The depot was a transfer station. 3 large cargo cruisers, lightly armed, carrying weapons, food, fuel, and replacement parts for our fleet. They were escorted by a single patrol frigate. No one had considered the depot a target, because no one had considered the humans capable of reaching it. The attack lasted 11 minutes. The human ships dropped out of FTL in a scattered, disorganized pattern that bore no resemblance to any tactical doctrine in our databases. They came from 6 different vectors simultaneously, which should have made them easy to pick off individually, but instead created a chaotic targeting problem for the frigate's weapons systems. Our gunners could not establish a firing solution, because the human ships never moved in a predictable pattern. They juked, they spun, they reversed course without warning. They fought the way their planet's oceans moved, in waves that seemed random, but were driven by invisible forces of coordination. They destroyed 2 of the 3 cargo cruisers and disabled the frigate. Then they docked with the 3rd cruiser and took everything inside it. Weapons, food, medical supplies, shield components, navigation data. They loaded it all into their ships in under 8 minutes and jumped back to FTL before our reinforcements arrived. 8 minutes. They had rehearsed this. Somewhere on the scorched surface of their planet, they had planned this operation with the same meticulous attention to detail that their species brought to everything it did when sufficiently motivated. The news reached Supreme Commander Vorath like a physical blow. I was present when the report was delivered. I watched his crystalline face shift through patterns I had never seen before, colors and textures that did not map to any emotional state in our psychological lexicon. He was experiencing something no Valyrian commander had experienced in 4,000 years. He was experiencing the feeling of being hunted by something he had tried to conquer. How? He demanded. How did they reach the depot? They have no star charts, they have no navigation data. They should not even know where the depot exists. His intelligence officer, a meticulous woman named Vorath, answered quietly. Commander, they recovered a full navigation database from the warship they captured on day 23. They now have the coordinates of every Valyrian outpost, depot, and colony within 50 light-years of Earth. The silence that followed was absolute. I spoke into it. They are not following any known military doctrine, Commander. They are improvising. Every engagement is different. Every tactic is new. They learn from each encounter, and they never repeat a mistake. One of your admirals called it insanity. It is not insanity. It is creativity. And we have never fought a species that had any. Vorath turned on me with fury in his eyes. Then what do you suggest, Counselor, since you seem to understand them so well? I suggest we negotiate, I said, immediately, before this escalates further. Negotiate? With animals? With a species that went from 0 FTL capability to raiding our supply lines in 31 days. Yes, Commander. I suggest we negotiate, because in another 31 days, they will not be raiding supply lines. They will be at our doorstep. Vorath dismissed me from the command center, but I could see the doubt spreading through his staff. The admirals exchanged glances. The tactical officers studied their displays with an intensity that suggested they were no longer looking for opportunities. They were looking for threats. On day 34, humanity broadcast a message. Not to our fleet, to the Valurian civilian population. They had somehow gained access to our domestic communication networks, likely from the captured ship's communication array, and they transmitted a statement that was received by every inhabited Valurian world within range. The message was in flawless Valurian, translated with a precision that our own diplomatic corps would have envied. It read, "To the citizens of the Valurian Dominion, we are the people of Earth. We did not seek this conflict. Your leaders chose to attack our world without provocation. They burned our cities. They killed our families. We responded as any species would when its home is threatened. We defended ourselves. We are not your enemies. Your leaders made us your enemies. You do not have to follow them into destruction. We ask only that you consider whether this war serves your interests, or only theirs. We hold no anger toward the Valurian people. We hold anger toward the Valurian command that chose war over peace. This message is not a threat. It is an invitation. Choose differently." It was signed by every surviving government on Earth, collectively, unanimously. A species of 200 nations speaking with one voice, again. The effect on Valurian society was profound. No conquered species had ever spoken to our citizens directly. No conquered species had ever tried to separate the Dominion's people from its leadership, and no conquered species had ever offered mercy while simultaneously demonstrating the capability to cause destruction. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were running a campaign, a psychological campaign designed to fracture the Dominion from within, and it was working. Reports began arriving from colony worlds. Citizens were questioning the war. Public demonstrations, something virtually unknown in Valurian society, erupted on 3 planets. The colonial governor of Verath Prime submitted a formal petition to the High Council, requesting an immediate ceasefire. Then the captured soldiers began returning. Over the course of the previous weeks, our forces had engaged in dozens of skirmishes with human vessels. In several of these engagements, Valurian crew members had been captured when their ships were disabled. We had assumed they were dead. Valurian doctrine dictated that prisoners of war were executed. It was what we had always done. We assumed the humans would do the same. They did not. On day 37, a Valurian escape pod appeared at the edge of our fleet perimeter. Inside were 12 Valurian soldiers, unharmed, fed. Their injuries had been treated with medical technology that included both human and adapted Valurian techniques. Each soldier carried a data crystal containing a personal message from a human medical officer named Claire Bennett. The message said, "We treated your people with the respect they deserve as living beings. We ask only that you extend the same courtesy to ours. We are not monsters. We just do not lose." I interviewed the returned soldiers personally. Their accounts were consistent and deeply unsettling, not because of any mistreatment, but because of how well they had been treated. A Valurian lieutenant named Sorath told me that when he was captured, he expected immediate execution. Instead, a human soldier gave him water and asked if he was injured. When Sorath's arm was set in a medical splint, the human doctor, Claire Bennett, explained every step of the procedure so he would not be frightened. She asked about my family, Sorath said, still visibly shaken. She asked if I had children. When I told her I had a daughter, she showed me a picture of her own daughter and said she hoped both our children would grow up in a galaxy at peace. Another returned soldier, a weapons technician named Korith, described being held in a facility where the humans had set up a makeshift detention area. The guards were armed, but not hostile. They provided food, they allowed the prisoners to communicate with each other, and they played music in the common area. Human music. Strange, emotional compositions that Korith found disturbing at first, and then, gradually, beautiful. "They are not what we were told," Korith said quietly. "They are not primitives. They are not animals. They are people. Frightened, angry, grieving people who are fighting for their home, and they still found time to be kind to us." These accounts spread through the fleet like a contagion. Soldiers who had been confident in the righteousness of the conquest began to question it. Officers who had dismissed the humans as inferior began to wonder whether they had been wrong. The morale of the Valurian fleet, once unshakable, began to crack. Vorath saw the fractures spreading, and he did what desperate leaders have always done. He doubled down. He announced a final strategy, a concentrated assault on Earth with every remaining ship. No more skirmishes, no more supply raids. One overwhelming strike to end the war decisively. He called it Operation Final Light. The name alone should have told him how it would end. I requested a private audience with Vorath on the evening before the assault was scheduled. He granted it, perhaps out of habit, perhaps because some part of him still valued my counsel, even as he rejected it. I stood before him in his quarters, and I spoke plainly. Commander, the humans have achieved faster than light travel. They have reverse-engineered our weapons and our shields. They have captured our ships, raided our supply lines, and turned our own citizens against us. In 40 days, they have gone from a planet-bound species with no knowledge of alien life to a spacefaring civilization capable of projecting force across light years. If you attack them with everything we have, and you fail, there will be nothing left to protect our homeworld. Vorath looked at me with eyes that had lost their fire. He looked tired, he looked old. And if we do not attack, Counselor, what then? Do we retreat? Do we surrender to a species that was nothing a month ago? They were never nothing, I said. We simply did not know what they were. And now we do. They are the most adaptive, the most resilient, the most terrifyingly creative species this galaxy has ever produced. And we woke them up. We showed them the stars and gave them a reason to reach for them. If we had left them alone, they might have spent another century fighting among themselves. Instead, we united them. That is our legacy, Commander. We created the monster, and now we must live with it, if we can. Vorath stood and walked to his viewport. He stared out at the stars for a long time. Then he turned back to me. The assault proceeds at dawn, Counselor. You are relieved of duty. Guards escorted me to a holding cell deep in the ship. As the door sealed behind me, I pressed my hand against the cold metal wall and thought about the species waiting below. The species that had turned our own weapons against us in a month. The species that had raided our supply lines in 31 days. The species whose 81-year-old grandmothers flew cutting torches into the hulls of our warships. And I thought, for the first time, that I might not survive the next day. Not because the humans would show no mercy, but because Vorath's pride had carried us past the point of no return. The Battle of Earth lasted 11 hours. The war lasted 43 days. The Valurian Dominion lasted 4,000 years. I am what remains of it. I experienced the final battle from my holding cell in the lower decks of Vorath's flagship, the Eternal Dominion. I could not see it. I could only feel it. The vibrations through the hull, the distant thunder of weapons discharging, the sickening lurch of a massive ship evading incoming fire, the groaning of metal under stresses it was never designed to endure. And the silence. The worst part was always the silence between the impacts. Those brief moments where the ship held its breath and I held mine, and neither of us knew if the next second would bring another hit or the cold nothing of structural failure and decompression. Vorath had launched his assault with 120 warships. Everything the Dominion had left in this sector. It was the largest single fleet action in Valurian history, and he sent it against a planet he believed was broken, a species he believed was on the verge of collapse. He was wrong about everything. The fleet dropped out of FTL in Earth orbit expecting to find a wounded world. What it found instead was a defensive network that would have given pause to any military force in the galaxy. In 43 days, the humans had built a fleet. Not a proper fleet by Valurian standards. Not sleek, not uniform, not elegant. It was a collection of ships that looked like they had been assembled during an earthquake by engineers who were arguing about the blueprints. Some were converted cargo vessels. Some were rebuilt Valurian ships with human modifications welded onto every surface. Some were entirely new constructions that followed no design philosophy I could identify. There were over 40 of them. 40 ships built by a species that had not possessed a single space-capable military vessel 43 days ago. And behind the fleet, the surface of Earth bristled with weapons. Thousands of ground-based launchers, missile batteries, energy projectors built from reverse-engineered Valurian technology, all pointed upward. The planet itself had become a weapon. I learned the details of the battle later, after it was over, after the silence became permanent. I learned them from the humans who pulled me from the wreckage of the Eternal Dominion and treated my injuries with the same careful attention they had given every Valyrian prisoner throughout the war. The battle began with the human fleet advancing to meet ours. Standard defensive doctrine would have called for them to stay close to their planet, to use the ground-based weapons as support. The humans did not follow standard defensive doctrine. They attacked. Their fleet broke into 6 independent groups, each one operating with apparent autonomy, but coordinating through a communication network so rapid and so flexible that our tactical officers could not predict their movements. They fought the way their ancestors had fought on the surface of their world, in small, mobile units that struck hard and withdrew before a coordinated response could be mounted. A human commander named George Patterson led the Central Assault Group. His flagship was a former cargo hauler called the Catherine, named after his mother. It was 70 meters long, carried improvised energy weapons on every surface, and had a Valyrian shield generator strapped to its hull with industrial clamps. It should not have been able to fight a Valyrian destroyer. It destroyed 3 of them in the first hour. Patterson's tactics were unlike anything in our combat databases. He used the asteroids and debris in Earth's orbital space as cover, darting between them like a creature hiding in a forest. He fired from unexpected angles, at unexpected times, targeting systems and subsystems that our captains did not think to protect, because no enemy had ever targeted them before. He hit communication arrays, sensor clusters, shield generator mountings, the small, vulnerable components that held a warship together. He did not try to overpower our ships. He took them apart, piece by piece, with surgical precision. On the left flank, a group of 7 human vessels engaged our cruiser screen in close combat. Close combat between warships is extraordinarily dangerous, and almost universally avoided by civilized militaries. The humans sought it out. They flew their ships so close to ours that our main weapons could not track them without risking friendly fire. Then they used cutting beams, modified mining lasers, to slice into our hulls at point-blank range. They were not fighting like a navy. They were fighting like surgeons with blowtorches. One human pilot, a woman named Lucy Graham, flew her fighter into the gap between a Valyrian battleship's primary and secondary hulls, a space barely wide enough for her vessel. She navigated through the internal structure of the ship at full speed, firing at every critical system she passed, and emerged from the other side trailing fire and wreckage. The battleship lost power 30 seconds later. Lucy Graham's ship was damaged beyond repair, but she ejected safely and was recovered by another human vessel. She was 26 years old. She had been a commercial airline pilot 6 weeks ago. But the moment that defined the battle, the moment that broke the Valyrian fleet, came in the 7th hour. The Eternal Dominion, Vorath's flagship, was the most powerful warship in the Valyrian arsenal. Triple-layered shields, redundant power systems, weapons capable of glassing a continent. It was the symbol of the Dominion's supremacy, and every Valyrian in the fleet drew confidence from its presence. The humans understood this. They understood that defeating the fleet was not enough. They had to defeat the idea of the fleet. They had to break the symbol. A coordinated assault group of 12 human ships, led by a vessel called the Day One, made a direct run at the Eternal Dominion. They came in fast, using FTL micro-jumps to close the distance before our weapons could establish firing solutions. The jumps were insanely dangerous, each one risking materialization inside another object or into the path of weapons fire. 3 ships were lost in the approach. The remaining 9 reached the flagship. They swarmed it. 9 ships, each one a fraction of the Eternal Dominion's size, attacking from every direction simultaneously. Our gunners could not track them all. Our shields were calibrated for concentrated fire from capital ships, not dispersed attacks from multiple small vessels moving at different speeds on different vectors. The shield harmonics fluctuated wildly as the generators tried to adapt. The humans had studied our shield technology. They knew exactly what frequencies to hit, what patterns to use, and what sequence of impacts would cause cascading failures. The shields fell in the 8th hour. The hull breaches began in the 9th. By the 10th hour, human boarding teams were inside the ship. I heard them coming. From my holding cell deep in the lower decks, I heard the distant crack of ballistic weapons, the hiss of cutting torches, the heavy footfalls of boots on Valyrian deck plating. Our soldiers fought back. The corridors of the Eternal Dominion became a close-quarters battle that raged deck by deck, compartment by compartment. The sounds grew closer. Then they stopped. Not gradually, abruptly. One moment there was fighting, the next, silence. Then my cell door opened. A human soldier stood in the doorway, young, early 20s perhaps, male. He had a wound on his forehead that was bleeding freely, the red liquid running down the side of his face in a pattern that mirrored the stress lines in Valyrian crystal. He was breathing hard. His uniform was torn. His weapon was raised. He looked at me. I looked at him. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he pulled a small device from his belt, looked at it, and looked back at me. "You are Counselor Rithon," he said. His voice was steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "You are the one who told them not to do this." I nodded. I did not trust myself to speak. He lowered his weapon. "Then you are coming with us." He stepped aside and gestured down the corridor. "My name is Edward Shaw. To keep up." He led me through the ruined corridors of the flagship. The damage was staggering. Entire sections had been depressurized. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that made the destruction look even more severe. We passed Valyrian soldiers who had been restrained but not harmed, sitting against bulkheads with their hands secured, guarded by human soldiers who offered them water. We passed the command center. The doors were blown open. Inside, I could see the wreckage of Vorath's command table, the tactical displays shattered, the viewport cracked. Vorath himself was seated on the floor, his hands bound, his crystalline skin dull and cracked. He was alive. He looked up as I passed. Our eyes met. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Edward Shaw led me to a breach in the hull where a human shuttle was docked. As I stepped aboard, I looked back at the Eternal Dominion one last time. The great ship was dark. Its weapons were silent. Its engines were dead. 4,000 years of Valyrian supremacy ended in 11 hours by a species that had learned to fly 6 weeks ago. The shuttle carried me to Earth, to the surface, to a world that was scarred and burned and broken in 1,000 ways but still alive. Still breathing, still fighting. Not against us anymore, just fighting to survive, to rebuild, to heal, as they had always done. I was brought before a council, not a military tribunal, not an execution chamber, a room full of humans seated around a table, looking at me with expressions that held anger and grief, and exhaustion, but also something else. Something I had not expected. Curiosity. They asked me questions, not about military intelligence or Valyrian weaknesses. They asked me about my people, who we were, why we had attacked, what our society valued, whether peace was possible with the surviving Valyrian colonies. They wanted to understand us. This species, which had just endured 43 days of bombardment and invasion, which had lost millions of its people, which had been forced to fight a war it never wanted, was sitting across a table from me and asking how to make peace. Helen Price was there. She sat at the head of the table, older than she had looked on the screen, her face lined with weeks of sleepless coordination and impossible decisions. She looked at me and said, "Counselor Rithon, your people attacked our world without provocation. You killed millions of our citizens. You destroyed cities that took us centuries to build. By every measure of justice, we would be within our rights to retaliate against your homeworld." I waited. "We are not going to do that," she continued. "We are not going to become what you are. We are going to offer your surviving colonies a choice. Survival, peace, or war. We hope they choose peace. We hope you can help them make that choice." I stared at her. "Why?" I asked. It was the only word I could manage. "Why would you show mercy after what we did to you?" Helen Price was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I have carried with me ever since. She said, "Because mercy is not weakness, counselor. It is the hardest thing a species can choose when it has every reason to choose otherwise. And we have decided that if we are going to be the most dangerous species in this galaxy, we are also going to be the most compassionate. Because one without the other is just cruelty. And we have had enough cruelty to last us a lifetime." The room was silent. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had defeated the Valyrian Dominion. They were tired. They were grieving. Some of them had tears on their faces. But they sat straight, and they met my eyes, and they waited for my answer. "I will help you," I said. "I will carry your message to every Valurian colony that will listen. And I will tell them the truth about what you are." "And what are we?" Helen asked. I thought about Simon Price, who had flown his crippled ship into a Valurian frigate and spoken of morning light. I thought about Margaret Holloway, 81 years old, who had breached the hull of a warship with a cutting torch and a lullaby. I thought about Lucy Graham, who had flown through the interior of a battleship at full speed, because no one had told her it was impossible. I thought about Claire Bennett, who had treated Valurian soldiers with kindness and shown them pictures of her daughter. I thought about Edward Shaw, who had spared my life because he believed I had tried to prevent this war. I thought about all of them, and I gave the only answer that was true. "You are the most terrifying species I have ever encountered," I said. "Not because of your weapons, not because of your adaptability, because you can wage a war of annihilation and still have enough love left over to show mercy to the enemy that started it. That is what makes you dangerous, Helen Price. Not your fury, your compassion, because it means you will never become the monsters you fight. And that means you will never stop fighting, because you will never lose the thing that makes the fight worth having." Helen looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. They gave me a ship, a small Valurian scout vessel that they had captured and repaired with more care than our own engineers would have used. They loaded it with supplies, with star charts, with a recorded message, and with this testimony that I am delivering now. I have been traveling for weeks. I have visited 11 Valurian colonies. At each one, I have played the message from Earth, and at each one, I have watched my people listen and think and begin to understand what we have done and what was done to us in return. Not in vengeance, in self-defense. The distinction matters more than I can express. The Dominion is gone, not destroyed, dissolved. Colony by colony, world by world, the Valurian people are choosing to set down the identity of conquerors and find a new one. It is painful. It is slow. It is necessary. And so I am recording this testimony, not for my people, for every other species in this galaxy that might one day look at Earth and see what we saw. A small blue world. A young species, an easy target. To every species receiving this message, hear me clearly. The humans are not conquerors. They are not empire builders. They do not want your worlds, your resources, or your submission. They want to be left in peace. They want to raise their children. They want to explore the stars at their own pace and in their own way. They are, in most respects, a remarkably gentle species when they are not being threatened. But if you go to their world with warships and fire, if you burn their cities and threaten their children, if you try to break their will and subjugate their spirit, they will not break. They will not bend. They will learn your weapons faster than you thought possible. They will turn your own technology against you. They will fight with a fury that you cannot comprehend, a creativity you cannot predict, and a determination that you cannot outlast. And when they have defeated you, they will offer you mercy that you do not deserve, and peace that you did not earn, because that is who they are. The Valurian Dominion learned this lesson. We paid the highest price a civilization can pay for the arrogance of believing we were the strongest thing in the universe. We were not. You have been warned. My name is Counselor Rithon. I was the last advisor of the Valurian Dominion. I am alive today because a bleeding young soldier with a wound on his face looked at me and decided I was worth saving. Not because I was valuable, not because I was useful, because I had tried to prevent a war, and that was enough for him. That one act of mercy, that one moment of compassion from a species that had every reason to hate me, told me more about humanity than 4,000 years of Valurian intelligence gathering ever could. That is the species you are dealing with. Dangerous beyond measure and merciful beyond reason. Choose wisely, because they will give you exactly one chance to make the right decision. And if you waste it, as we did, then you will learn what we learned. Congratulations. You just declared war on the most lethal species alive, and the worst part, the part that will haunt you as it haunts me, is that they will win the war and then forgive you for starting it. That is what makes them unstoppable, not the weapons, Not the ships, not the fearless pilots or the brilliant engineers, or the grandmothers with cutting torches. It is the fact that after everything, after the fire and the death and the fury, they still believe that peace is worth more than victory. And they are right. End of testimony. Counselor Rithon, broadcasting on all frequencies. To whoever is listening, wherever you are, learn from us. Leave Earth alone.